Within the next few minutes, you will uncover the darkest psychological trap ever set for men. A trap so insidious that it has turned love into a silent war of attrition. This isn't just about attraction. This is about why women chase men who don't want them, why your kindness feels like weakness, and why the more you try to prove your worth, the more invisible you become. By the end of this series, you will wield an understanding so brutal, it will feel like stealing fire from the gods. Imagine this. A man walks into a room. He doesn't smile too much, he doesn't linger for approval. He's there, but not quite there. And like clockwork, eyes follow him. Whispers curl around his indifference. Meanwhile, another man, eager, attentive, present, fades into the wallpaper. Why? Because desire is not a response to value, it's a response to absence. Kierkegaard called this the aesthetic sphere, where men and women dance in patterns of avoidance and obsession, mistaking the chase for love. History is littered with this paradox. Take Lord Byron, the 19th century poet whose scandals were as legendary as his verse. He rarely wrote love letters. He received them, by the thousands. Women dueled for his attention, threw themselves at his feet, even bribed his servants for locks of his hair. His secret? He didn't care. Not in the way they wanted him to. Kierkegaard would argue this wasn't cruelty, it was the inevitable result of a truth too uncomfortable to admit. The heart wants what it cannot have, and despises what it can. Here's a story you won't forget. In 2005, a Harvard study tracked dating behaviors across 10,000 participants. The findings? Women consistently rated mystery and unpredictability as top attractors, higher than kindness, stability, or even physical attractiveness. But the real shock came later. When men displayed these traits intentionally, attraction plummeted. Why? Because the illusion shattered. The chase only works if the prey doesn't know it's being chased. Kierkegaard saw this centuries earlier. In Either Or, he writes of the rotation method, a psychological tactic where a man deliberately withdraws attention to stoke desire. It's not manipulation, it's survival. Modern dating apps have turned this into a blood sport. A 2022 Tinder experiment revealed that profiles with fewer photos and sparser bios received 300% more matches. The algorithm didn't favor them, human nature did. The less you give, the more they invent. The more they invent, the deeper they fall. Let's talk about male trauma. You were told that being good would be enough, that honesty and devotion were currencies. But here's the brutal truth. Niceness is not a virtue in the erotic realm. It's a handicap. Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith doesn't plead, he acts. He doesn't confess, he compels. Consider the case of a Reddit user who documented his nice guy transformation. For years, he brought flowers, remembered anniversaries, dropped everything to listen. His reward? A breakup text. You're perfect, but I'm not in love. 6 months later, he disappeared. No social media, no explanations. Guess who she couldn't stop talking about? This isn't cynicism, it's ontology. Kierkegaard's leap to faith requires a man to embrace his own sovereignty. A woman doesn't want a mirror, she wants a storm, and storms don't apologize for their chaos. But what if this chase is a lie? What if women don't actually want elusive men, they just think they do? Now we dive into the horror of buyer's remorse in love. The 15th century nun who starved herself for a man who never knew her name, and why the hardest thing a man can do is not to run, but to let himself be wanted. The game you're playing isn't just rigged, it's designed to break you. And the only way out is to become the man who doesn't need to play at all. She finally has him, the elusive man. The one who played the game so well is now hers. The texts are immediate, the plans are set, the chase is over. And then, something shifts. The thrill fades, the mystery unravels. What was intoxicating at a distance becomes suffocating up close. This is the cruel joke of desire. Women don't want the elusive man, they want the illusion of him. Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, the despair of getting what you thought you wanted, only to realize it was the wanting itself that kept you alive. History whispers this truth in the shadows. Take Héloïse de Gentilly, the 12th century scholar whose love letters to Peter Abelard are legendary. He was her teacher, a man of towering intellect and icy detachment. She adored him, worshipped him, tore herself apart for him. But when Abelard finally surrendered, when he became hers in flesh and devotion, her passion curdled into something darker. She wrote, "I preferred love to marriage, freedom to chains." Kierkegaard would nod. The moment a man is fully possessed, he ceases to be the object of desire. He becomes a prisoner of it. Modern psychology confirms this with brutal clarity. A 2017 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology tracked couples over 5 years. The findings? Relationships where the man was initially hard to get had higher passion in the early stages, but also higher rates of disillusionment. The women in these relationships reported feeling empty once the chase ended, as if they'd been sold a dream that dissolved upon contact. This isn't love, it's addiction. And like any addict, the withdrawal is worse than the high. There's a story Kierkegaard would have loved. In 15th century Florence, a young nun named Beatrice becomes obsessed with a traveling poet who visited her convent once. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and left without a word. She never saw him again. But that was enough. For years, she refused food unless it was served on a plate he might have touched. She slept on the floor where his shadow had fallen. When she died, her diary was found filled with descriptions of a man who, by all accounts, had forgotten her the moment he left. This is the paradox in its purest form. The more absent he was, the more real he became in her mind. This isn't romance, it's pathology, and it's not confined to medieval convents. The same dynamic plays out in your texts, your dates, your relationships. The man who replies instantly, he's predictable. The man who waits, he's alive in her imagination. A 2020 analysis of 50,000 dating app conversations found that response time was inversely proportional to attraction. Wait 3 hours to reply, her interest spikes. Wait a day, she's crafting narratives about your mysterious life. But here's the trap. If you do this deliberately, she'll sense the calculation. The game only works if you're not playing. Consider the case of James, a musician who unintentionally became the most talked about man in his social circle. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't classically handsome, but he had one trait that sealed his legend. He was never fully there. Parties? He left early. Group chats? He read, but rarely replied. Women confessed to friends they felt haunted by him. One even admitted she dreamed of him more than her own boyfriend. When asked why, she said, "I don't know if he even likes me, and I need to know." Kierkegaard would call this the dizziness of freedom. The elusive man isn't loved for who he is, he's loved for the space he leaves empty. And in that space, women plant their fantasies, their fears, their unfinished stories. But the moment he tries to fill it, the spell breaks. A 2019 study published in Psychological Science found that uncertainty amplifies attraction by 40%. But the instant certainty arrives, the magic dies. This is why men who play hard to get eventually lose. The goal isn't to withhold, it's to be someone who doesn't need to. So where does this leave you? If chasing doesn't work, and being chased backfires, what's left? Kierkegaard's answer is simple, but brutal. Stop being a character in her story. Become the author of your own. The elusive man isn't a tactic. He's a man who genuinely doesn't revolve around her approval. He doesn't disappear to manipulate. He disappears because he has a world beyond her. Think of Fitzgerald, who wrote The Gatsby while Zelda partied without him. She accused him of neglect. He accused her of distraction. But in the end, it was Fitzgerald's absence, his total immersion in his work, that made him unforgettable to her. She wrote in her diary, "I hate him for being right when I'm wrong, and I hate him more when he doesn't care that I am." This isn't indifference, it's sovereignty. The moment you make a woman the center of your universe, you cease to be a planet. You become debris. But what happens when the elusive man meets his match? What happens when a woman refuses to play the game, or worse, plays it better than you? Now we expose the femme fatale who turns Kierkegaard's paradox against men, the 18th century courtesan who broke kings with silence, and why the only way to win is to stop keeping score.
There is a woman who does not chase. She does not pine. She does not rearrange her life around the absence of a man. Instead, she turns Kierkegaard's paradox against him, and in doing so exposes the raw nerve of male desire, the fear of being the one who cares more. History remembers these women as sirens, witches, destroyers of kings, but their real power was simpler and far more devastating. They refused to need. Take Madame de Pompadour, the 18th century courtesan who held Louis XV in her grip for 20 years, not with beauty, which fades, nor with sex, which dulls, but with silence. When the king's attention wandered, she did not plead. She vanished. Not to country estates or dramatic exits, but into a world so vibrant, so untouchable, that his absence became his punishment. She hosted salons filled with philosophers, funded revolutions in art, became the intellectual pulse of France, and Louis, the most powerful man in Europe, found himself knocking at her door like a beggar. Kierkegaard would have recognized the tactic immediately. The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. Modern psychology calls this the scarcity principle, but it's older than civilization. A 2021 study in evolutionary behavioral sciences found that men become most obsessed with women who exhibit selective disengagement, the ability to walk away without a backward glance. The researchers expected men to move on. Instead, they doubled down. One subject spent $8,000 on gifts for a woman who hadn't texted him in months, confessing, "I just need to know I still matter to her." This isn't love. It's ego's last stand. Here's a story they don't teach in history books. In 1760, Venetian courtesan Caterina Dolfin was betrayed by her noble lover. He expected tears, rage, perhaps a desperate attempt to win him back. Instead, she threw a party. Not just any party, a masquerade where every guest wore his family crest mocked in gold thread. She danced with his enemies, laughed with his creditors, and when he finally burst in furious, she greeted him with a smile and a question. "Who are you again?" Within weeks, he was offering a fortune for her attention. She refused. By year's end, he'd ruined himself, trying to ruin her. This is the dark mirror of Kierkegaard's paradox. Men claim to want devotion, but they ache for the woman who doesn't give it. A 2019 analysis of 10,000 dating profiles revealed a chilling pattern. Men swiped right most aggressively on women whose bios hinted at indifference, probably won't reply, here for a good time, not a long time. The researchers called it the challenge effect. The women called it common sense. "Men fall in love in the spaces between my attention," wrote one respondent. Consider the case of Elena, a 29-year-old artist who became a Tinder urban legend. She didn't use provocative photos. She didn't play coy. She did one thing. She never messaged first. Not once. And yet, men became obsessed. One flew from Berlin to LA just to accidentally bump into her at a coffee shop. Another sent a daily poem for 147 days straight. When asked why, their answers were identical. I've never met a woman who didn't need me. Kierkegaard warned of this in The Seducer's Diary. The more one withholds, the more the other imagines. But Elena wasn't withholding, she was living. Her Instagram showed a life so rich, midnight swims in bioluminescent bays, sketching strangers in Tangier, learning to forge samurai swords in Kyoto, that men weren't competing with other men, they were competing with her freedom. And freedom always wins. So what's the lesson? That men are masochists? That love is a power struggle? No. The truth is far simpler. Desire cannot survive certainty. The moment you know you have someone, the magic fades. This is why the femme fatale wins, not because she's cruel, but because she refuses to be possessed. A 2022 Stanford study tracked brain activity in men viewing profiles of women who'd liked them first versus women who hadn't. The results were grotesque. The men's reward centers shut down for the interested women. But for the aloof ones, dopamine eruptions akin to gambling highs. The lead researcher summarized, male desire is a feedback loop of what's just out of reach. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Kierkegaard knew it. The door to happiness opens outward. The more you try to pull someone in, the more you jam the hinges. But what if none of this matters? What if the entire game, the chase, the power, the paradox, is just a distraction from the one thing that terrifies both men and women more than rejection? This is where we go nuclear. The 11th century monk who found the loophole in desire, the neurological hack that erases need, and why the only way to win is to stop playing.
There was once a monk in 11th century Tibet who discovered something that shattered him. After years of meditation in a cave, he emerged expecting enlightenment, only to realize he still craved the touch of a woman he'd left behind. This wasn't failure, it was revelation. The opposite of desire isn't satisfaction, it's indifference. And indifference isn't achieved by resisting temptation, but by staring directly into its eyes until they blink first. Kierkegaard hinted at this when he wrote, "Boredom is the root of all evil," because boredom is what remains when the chase collapses under its own weight. Modern neuroscience confirms this with terrifying precision. A 2023 study published in Nature Human Behavior mapped the brains of subjects exposed to unrequited love scenarios. When rejection was certain, the pain centers lit up briefly before going dark. But when the outcome was uncertain, when there was still a sliver of hope, the brain's craving circuits burned like a furnace. The researchers called it the addiction of maybe. This is why the elusive man torments women and the femme fatale destroys men, not because they're cruel, but because they're uncertainty incarnate. Consider the case of Daniel, a former pickup artist, who spent a decade mastering every manipulation tactic: negging, push-pull, strategic withdrawal. It worked until it didn't. One night, after sleeping with a woman he'd been gaming for months, he felt nothing. Not guilt, not triumph, just a hollow fatigue. The next morning, he deleted every dating app, burned his notebooks of routines, and moved to a small town where no one knew him. For the first time in his adult life, he was invisible to women. And for the first time, he was free. Kierkegaard predicted this. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Daniel hadn't been seducing women, he'd been performing for them. The moment he stopped, the game lost its power.
A 2022 Oxford study found that men who quit game tactics reported lower short-term sexual success but higher long-term fulfillment. One subject phrased it perfectly. "I used to make women want me. Now I just don't care if they don't." In 1724, French philosopher Montesquieu wrote a letter advising a heartbroken friend, "When you cannot forget a woman, remember this: she eats, she sleeps, she sweats, she defecates like a beast of the field. The goddess is mortal." This wasn't cynicism, it was liberation. Ancient Stoics called it premeditatio mortis, meditating on the mundane mortality of those we idolize. A 2021 UCLA experiment proved its power. Subjects who visualized crushes performing banal human acts, flossing, clipping toenails, arguing with customer service, reported 60% less obsessive attraction within weeks. But there's a darker layer. Medieval monks practiced aesthetic mortification, staring at beautiful women until their features blurred into flesh. Kierkegaard's father forced him as a child to stare at the corpse of a young bride until desire turned to ash. These weren't exercises in misogyny, but in detachment. The 21st century version? A Reddit user documented his 30-day detox. No porn, no fantasizing, no checking ex's social media. By day 27, he wrote, "I passed her on the street. She smiled. I felt nothing. It was like being cured of a disease I didn't know I had." Here's the secret. No dating guru will tell you. Neediness isn't a behavior. It's a belief. The belief that someone else holds the missing piece of you. Kierkegaard called this the despair of weakness, the lie that you are incomplete alone. A 2020 Harvard study tracked two groups of men. One practiced self-expansion, learning skills, traveling solo, starting projects. The other focused on dating. After 6 months, the self-expansion group reported higher attraction from women despite less pursuit. The reason? Magnetic people aren't those who want others, they're those who don't need them. So where does this leave us? The elusive man is a prisoner of his own allure. The femme fatale is a slave to her power. Both are trapped in Kierkegaard's aesthetic sphere, the hell of eternal chasing. The way out isn't another tactic. It's the realization that you were never chasing love. You were chasing distraction from yourself. When the monk returned to his cave after seeing his old love, he didn't resist desire. He sat with it until it dissolved into silence. That silence has a name. Kierkegaard called it the religious stage, where you stop seeking mirrors and become the light itself. A man who doesn't need validation doesn't play games. He ends them. And in that ending, he finds the only love that ever mattered, the kind that doesn't have to be chased. The house always wins, unless you burn it down. And the moment you do, you'll realize there was never a house at all, just the walls you built around your own freedom.